Most builders and contractors believe cost-plus contracts are low risk, but the truth is they show up in lawsuits roughly 2 to 3 times as often, and in arbitrations 9 times as often as fixed-cost contracts. Why is that? Well, it's because cost-plus doesn't remove risk, it just moves risk out of estimating and into documentation, approvals, collections, and client trust. So, what's the one thing that determines whether cost plus protects you or blows up in your face? What is the hidden trap that cost plus can put you into, and how do you protect your profit, and how do you protect your business from the hidden risks of a cost plus contract? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. You're listening to the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com, where it's all about systematizing your construction business to maximize freedom, impact, and wealth. My name is Todd Dawalt, and my team and I have helped over 400 construction companies eliminate chaos, grow their profits, and grow their team. So whether you're a general contractor, like a custom builder or a remodeler who does mostly cost-plus contracts, so maybe you're thinking about getting into cost-plus contracts, or you're any type of contractor that does time and materials work, maybe even just on change orders, this one is for you. So today I want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions in construction, specifically in custom home building and remodeling. A lot of builders think that cost-plus contracts are the holy grail. They think, if I can sign a cost-plus contract, I'm not locked into a fixed price. I'm covered if material prices go up. I'm covered if they blow their allowance. I'm covered if they make changes. I'm covered if labor takes longer. I'm covered if the client can't make decisions. They believe cost-plus limits my downside. That's not actually true. It does limit something, but it doesn't limit your downside. I'll explain that later. I get why people would think that. I've been in construction for 30 years now and have managed over $300 million worth of work. And on the surface, on paper, the cost plus contract may feel safer because it's like, hey, I'm going to get paid for cost plus my fee. But in the real world, cost plus contracts can be some of the riskiest contracts you can use. In my experience, all of the disputes that I was involved with as an owner's rep, as a contractor, were when we got out of a fixed fee or out of a lump sum and we got into cost plus. So in the real world, cost plus contracts can be some of the riskiest contracts you can use. That's why, according to the author of Markup and Profits, cost plus contracts end up in lawsuits 2 to 3 times more often, and they end up in arbitration 9 times more often than a fixed cost contract. And it's not because the pricing model is evil. It's not because the cost plus model doesn't work. It's because cost plus has this hidden danger, this pitfall that a lot of builders don't see coming. And that pitfall it's what I call the just enough to start trap. The cost plus contract rewards the just enough to start trap. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a story that might keep you up tonight. This is a true legal case study. There was a high-end renovation project. The remodeler, who wasn't a criminal, he wasn't stealing funds, he wasn't trying to scam anyone. He started this modest-sized project under one pricing structure, which was a fixed cost, and then the owner decided to make some changes and increased scope, so they agreed to a time and materials approach, a cost-plus approach as the scope evolved. So the budget started to climb. The client kept adding on more scope. Now, in a cost-plus world, you might think, hey, the client saw the receipts, they saw the progress, they were in on the meetings, they approved everything because they made the selections, they approved the selections. Now they owe the money. That's not how it worked out. In this case, because there were overages, it got toward the end of the project, the final invoice came in, the homeowner wasn't happy and felt like things weren't handled properly, so the homeowner didn't pay the final invoice, got into litigation, and then the homeowner sued the builder for consumer fraud. Negligence, not just the overages, not just for the cost of what he felt was problematic, But he sued for consumer fraud over the way that the project had been documented and handled. Now, in this particular state, they have this was in New Jersey, which is the gold standard for consumer fraud. They have what's called treble damages. All right. In New Jersey, there's something called treble damages. If a homeowner wins a Consumer Fraud Act lawsuit, the court is not just allowed to, but the court is mandated to award triple the amount of the actual financial loss that was proven. For example, if a builder's fraud caused a homeowner $50,000 in damages to fix a roof that was messed up, the court must award the homeowner triple that amount, $150,000. And what triggers consumer fraud? In this case, there are specific technical violations that triggered the Consumer Fraud Acts. The builder didn't have a clearly stated final price. They didn't get things signed. They didn't have written change orders for every single budget increase. Because of that and a couple of other technical violations like failing to provide a written contract for jobs over $500, leaving a start and end date out from the contract, failing to include a description of the work or specific products and materials that are going to be used. And another technical violation is requesting final payment before the work is completed and inspected. If any of those technical violations are made by the builder, then that triggers the Consumer Fraud Act. So think about this. In a cost-plus contract, if the scope is unclear, you can't commit to a start and end date. If selections aren't made, you can't include a description of the specific products and materials that are going to be used. So in this case, the cost-plus contracts, one could argue, automatically create technical violations that trigger the Consumer Fraud Act. So in this case, for this builder, what started out, what felt like flexibility, trying to help the client out, turned into a legal and financial nightmare. I'm aware of a current situation with a contractor in this particular state who's dealing with a very similar situation. Cost plus contract, a customer made a lot of changes throughout the process. They got to close to the finish line, and the customer wasn't happy, and they found a lawyer, and the builder is being sued for these treble damages. And it's not just New Jersey. Several states have laws similar to this, maybe not as aggressive as New Jersey, but Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Texas, Ohio, just to name a few, have laws that protect the homeowner from fraudulent, evil builders. So that's the trap. It's the just enough to start trap. And in several states, this trap has really sharp teeth, legal teeth, that automatically, if you do just enough to start, even under a cost-plus contract, it can trigger a consumer fraud claim. Cost-plus it's not a safety net if your process is loose. It's a risk nightmare, and it's an audit nightmare. So if you're moving forward with unclear scopes of work, starting without selections being made, unclear costs, unclear schedule, then you're not just building a project. What you're doing is you're assembling a series of bear traps. Imagine these steel traps with sharp teeth. You are you're opening up the jaws and setting these traps for yourself, hoping that you're not the one who gets caught in it. Every project you start without a clear scope of work and a clear schedule and clear cost, every verbal okay, every allowance, every undocumented change that you say you'll figure out afterward, is another steel trap that you're setting for yourself, hoping that you are not the one who gets caught in it. And the thing is, the argument always shows up after the cost has been committed. That's what I really want you to catch here. With cost plus or T&M, the argument about money always, maybe it's not always, but if there's a dispute, it almost always happens after you have committed the money, after maybe you've spent the money, therefore your leverage is gone. Let me say that again. In cost plus, the argument about money almost always happens after your leverage is gone. After you've done the work, after you have the invoice, that's when the argument comes up. That's one of the biggest hidden risks, okay? If you're on a fixed price contract and there's a scope change or there's a disagreement, at least in theory, the conversation happens before the work moves forward. If somebody has an issue with the cost of something, then you talk about it before you do the work, while you have leverage. On a cost plus project or a T&M change order, for example, a lot of builders slide into this mindset of, hey, let's just keep things moving. We want to take care of the client. We want to keep the schedule. We'll figure this out as we go. We can start this project with an allowance. You don't need to do all of this hard work of picking out your light fixtures and plumbing fixtures right now. Let's just get a contract signed. We'll carry an allowance for it. We'll figure it out as we go. Something comes up, hey, we'll make a note of it. We'll sort that out later. We'll clean it up on the next bill. It's cost plus, right? And that is the just enough to start trap. Doing just enough to start, saying we'll figure it out later. And cost plus contracts make that trap incredibly easy to fall into. The contract gives you permission to start before you've really created enough clarity to control the job. Let me say that again. Cost plus contracts can give you psychological permission to start before you've really created enough clarity to control the job and reduce your risk. And once you do that, there are a bunch of other hidden risks that show up. A lot of other things pop up. See if any of these sound familiar. The first is what could be called the budget heart attack. A lot of cost plus jobs feel great early on. They get started. There's plenty of money available. There's this number with 1 or 2 commas in it. Hey, there's plenty of money. Yeah, we have to figure a lot of things out. Everybody's excited. It's the honeymoon phase. Clients making selections as they go along. The structure's going up. The work is moving. First couple of invoices get paid. And then you hit about the 60 to 80% mark. And that's when the client starts to realize what this project is actually going to cost. All of those little upgrades that they approved along the way, all of those few changes, all of those, hey, while we're at it, we should do this things, all of those allowances that went over 10 to 20% each, all of those little scope additions, they started stacking up. And here's the thing about changes and overages, they only add up when you finally add them up. And that's when the client realizes they may have blown their budget. That's when their construction loan might start feeling a little tight, and they realize that they are going to have to dip into their pocket. They don't have enough financing to finish this job. That's when the financing pressure shows up. And then they start having these feelings, these emotions like they've screwed up. They maybe feel like they've been taken advantage of. They start feeling like they've made a big mistake. They've picked the wrong builder. They start doing things like starting to try to claw back their money. And that's when the emotional temperature changes and the honeymoon is over. This doesn't happen at the beginning. It happens in the middle of the project at the 60%, 80% mark. Maybe, like some of these disputes we've talked about, they happen at the end. And when that happens, when that emotional temperature changes, see if this sounds familiar. Maybe you've been in this situation. The microscope comes out. This is the second hidden risk. The thing that gets triggered is the microscope effect. When the client starts to feel pressure, when they start to feel like maybe they made a mistake, or they have to start clawing money back, or they feel like they've been taken advantage of, they start looking at everything under a microscope. Every invoice, every hour of labor, every supplier bill. They start looking at markup. They start looking at things that they didn't even bat an eye at the beginning, right? They start looking at every hour of labor. They start questioning your overhead. They start asking you to reduce your fee. Every little thing that they ignored earlier suddenly becomes a big deal. That's when they start asking, why am I paying for this? Years ago, I interviewed a good friend of mine named Spencer Paget on the podcast, and he told a story about a $40,000 Snickers bar. When he was luxury custom home builder, they were getting toward the end of a project, and it was a cost plus contract, and the homeowner was looking through an invoice from Home Depot, and there was a Snickers bar on there. And that caused the customer, this was whatever a Snickers bar cost, a couple of bucks maybe, but that, along with some other things that were going on, maybe caused the customer to ask, hey, why am I being charged for a Snickers bar? Well, what had happened was the superintendent had gone there to pick up some materials and just grabbed a Snickers bar and maybe thought, hey, what's the big deal? This is a multi-million-dollar home. I'm just going to throw a $2 Snickers bar on there. Well, Spencer went on to tell the story that customers started scrutinizing that invoice and every other invoice and said that Snickers bar ended up costing him $40,000. The customer found $40,000 of costs that he wasn't comfortable paying because he put everything under the microscope. Hey, it's Todd here, and we'll get back to the episode in just a minute. But if you're like most builders and remodelers I talk to, maybe your business feels chaotic. You're working too many hours, you're not making as much money as you should, and it seems like every problem lands in your lap and too much depends on you. That sound familiar? Well, you may be thinking what you need to do is drill a series of 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch diameter holes around the perimeter of your office, insert sticks of dynamite, and blow the whole thing up, and then start over. Well, here's the good news. You're probably just 2 or 3 simple adjustments away from a completely different business. This is what I've found. It's not about working harder. It's not about selling more jobs. You don't need to fire everybody. You don't need to do a complete overhaul. There are not 1,000 things you need to fix, and you don't need dynamite. You just need a few moves that give you maximum results with minimum effort. And that's what I want to help you with. I want to help you uncover those things on a free business evaluation call with our team. Here's what we're going to do on your business evaluation call. We'll uncover the hidden profit that's already in your business. We'll outline the 2 or 3 simple adjustments that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. We'll map out a simple plan so you can have more profit, more control, and ultimately have a business that runs without you. And if it makes sense, we'll talk about how we can work together to help you make that happen. Here's the deal. We only offer a few of these calls a week, and not everyone qualifies. So if you have a wave of work coming at you, or you're planning to grow, now is the time to make those adjustments. Click the link in the show notes right now to schedule your free business evaluation call. And here's the third hidden risk. Once the invoices become a debate, once they get the microscope out, the billing, the cash flow slows down. Everything starts to slow down. Approvals take longer. Questions pile up. Your pay requests that they used to pay in 10 days start to get delayed. Meanwhile, you've already committed the money. Maybe you've burned the labor. Maybe you've already paid vendors and subs because things were going well and you want to take care of your people. Obviously, you're paying your overhead costs, and these things are racking up while your payments are slowing down. So even if the contract looks like it protects you, your cash flow is still getting squeezed. Even if you've got an ironclad contract, you have to deliberate with the clients. Sometimes you have to debate with the clients. You have to wait for them to pay, even if it goes to arbitration or litigation, or you have to file a mechanics lien. Yeah, your contract may say you're going to get paid, but it slows things down. Meanwhile, you're still committing these costs. And here's another thing a lot of builders don't talk about enough. Cost plus may seem to limit your downside, but it doesn't actually. In some cases, it may increase your downside, but it definitely, cost plus contracts definitely 100% of the time limit your upside. You cannot earn more profit. You cannot submit an invoice if you have a cost plus 20% contract. You're not going to get paid more than 20%. So it may seem like cost plus contracts limit your downside, but they really don't, in truth. They could increase your downside, but they definitely limit your upside. And that's a big hidden trap, because when a client hears cost plus, they're thinking transparency. And they think that transparency should mean lower margins, lower markups, more scrutiny. So now you're expected to show everything. They're expecting you to justify everything, you have to defend everything and somehow make less money while doing more administrative work. At the beginning, I said that cost plus contracts don't remove risk. They just move the risk out of estimating, and they move the risk from the front end of the project, and they move that risk into documentation, approvals, questions, and client trust. Some would say that you're going to spend 2 to 3 times as much effort and time administering a cost plus contract as you would on a fixed cost contract. So it's not a low risk situation. That is not a low risk scenario. It's high scrutiny, it's high paperwork, it's high emotional volatility with limited upside. And when the client doesn't feel clarity, what they experience is not transparency, right? Clients are going into this thinking, I'm going to get transparency. I'm getting the most bang for my buck as possible. I'm going to get transparency. What they get is confusion, and confusion kills trust. That's the piece that a lot of people miss. People say, well, cost plus is transparent. Not automatically. The cost plus contract does not automatically create transparency. What it creates is open book exposure. And those are not the same thing. Transparency, true transparency, is when the client has clarity before the money is committed. Confusion is when they see the cost after the money has been spent, and now they're trying to reverse engineer what happened. And that's why cost plus can quietly damage trust way faster than a fixed price contract. See, on a fixed price contract, the client may not love the number, but they understand the agreement before the work is done, before they get an invoice. On a sloppy cost plus job, they feel like the target keeps moving. And when that target keeps moving, trust starts to break down. So let's put this all together. Why are cost plus contracts dangerous? What are some of the not so apparent or hidden risks of a cost plus contract when they go bad? Because number one, they give permission to do just enough to start. Number two, they push the cost conversation until after the leverage is gone. This is where problems happen, is when cost conversations happen after the work is done and your leverage is gone. Number three, they can create a budget heart attack situation where the client suddenly realizes what this project is going to cost in the middle of the project, or even worse, at the end. Number four, they trigger the microscope effect, which causes a lot more administrative efforts on your part. Number five, they limit your upside while not really limiting your downside. And then number six, when you add up all of these things, when things go badly, they can create confusion that kills trust. And that's one thing that clients want. They want to be able to trust their builder. Now, with all that said, I'm not here to tell you that cost plus contracts are bad. That's not the point. Cost plus can work. It can be the right pricing structure in the right circumstances, but only if you do one thing right. Okay, cost plus obviously works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. And when it goes badly, it goes really badly. And in some cases, it goes so badly that it's an extinction level event for that company. And the tragedy is they never saw it coming. They've been using a cost plus contract with all of these hidden traps for years and then thinking it was limiting their risk. And in reality, it wasn't. And it just had to be exposed to the right situation, and it becomes an extinction level event, meaning the business goes away. And I'm not just talking about the business. In some cases, the corporate veil is pierced and the owner becomes individually liable for these costs. So I'm not here to say the cost plus is bad. I'm not here to say cost plus is evil. I'm not saying that you should abandon that. What I am saying, you need to do one thing right, okay? And this is the part I want you to remember. The solution is not a better cost plus contract. It's not spending tens of thousands of dollars with an attorney on an ironclad contract to cover every potential eventuality, to cover every potential risk. The goal is to reduce the risk up front. Okay, the solution is a robust, documented pre-construction process that keeps you out of the just enough to start trap. That's the answer. That's the real risk prevention. That's how you control the risk. It's not necessarily with the contract itself. It's not with the pricing model itself. It's with pre-construction. A robust, well-designed, documented pre-construction process. Because look, if you want cost plus to actually reduce your risk, you have to create the clarity before construction starts. Okay? Think about it. All of these things we're talking about, you're doing all of these steps at some point. The problem is you're just doing them too late. Let me explain. Here's what this looks like. Here's what a good pre-construction process looks like to protect your risk in any kind of contract, but especially in a cost-plus contract. This means that you define everything before you start. You have a clearly defined scope of work. You lock down selections as much as possible. The standard is all selections are made. All light fixtures, plumbing, flooring, cabinets, complete. The design has to be complete. You eliminate allowances. You document assumptions. You document exclusions. You have clear specifications on what you're going to build. You have a schedule. You assign decision deadlines. You identify any open loops before they become problems. So this means you have a 100% complete design, a detailed scope of work, complete selections and specifications, and subcontractor pricing and a schedule. So think about this. You may be thinking, that's a lot of work to do up front. When is the ideal time to determine how much a project is going to cost and what you're going to build? Think about it. You have three options. Which of these three options is the ideal time to know what you're going to build, for you to know and for the client to know what you're going to build and how much it's going to cost? Number one, at the end of the project. Number two, in the middle. Or number three, before you even start. The ideal time is before you start. Secondly, when there are changes, this is so important in any kind of contract. When there are changes, you must get budget approval before you commit cost. That means no labor, materials, subcontractor cost gets committed before it's priced, reviewed, and approved with a signed change order. You don't commit cost until you have budget to spend. And that's a change order. If you don't have budget to spend, you don't commit that cost. You don't authorize the work. You don't order materials. You don't write a purchase order. You don't commit cost until you have budget to spend. And the only way to get budget to spend is with a change order. Now you may be thinking, we're in the middle of a project. How do we do this? Well, here are a few tips. Okay. Get an estimated change order in place. If there's an additional scope, something pops up that in the middle of the project and you need to keep moving, but you don't really know what it's going to be, you need to get an estimated change order in place, a not to exceed amount. You have to have budget to spend before you commit money. Every contract should have this provision in there that you only do work with an approved change order. So follow it. The customer's already signed off on this. So get an estimated change order in place. If you think it's not to exceed, if you think it's going to be $5,000 to $8,000, get an estimated change order for $8,000 with a not to exceed amount. And that way you have budget to spend. When you commit that money, if you need more, you get an additional change order. If you don't spend that money, then you just reduce that with another change order if you need to. So get an estimated change order in place. Get approval on time and materials rates and estimated quantities before you get started. You must have budget to spend before you commit cost. And if they won't sign a change order, don't do the work. Period. So those are a few tips. So having these financial controls is crucial. You can't commit budget you don't have. And you only get budget with a signed change order. I'm aware of a situation right now where a builder was working on a very large project under a cost plus contract. There were some unforeseen conditions that came up. The design team approved the additional work, said, yes, it has to be done. There's no other option. They were given direction from the design team on what to complete. They had a cost-plus contract. They engaged the subcontractor to do the work. The subcontractor left a big chunk of the material cost out of his estimate, which was passed along to the client. The work was done. And then the invoice came in, and this big chunk of material that wasn't on the original estimate was in the invoice. And the client had a big problem with this. Under the cost-plus contract, it said they are responsible for it. Everybody agreed this work was done, but the client didn't see that number in the estimate. And then they started pulling out the microscope. Now things are getting ugly. So had they followed this financial control that says we only commit cost when we have budget to spend, if they had followed this financial control, they would not be in the situation. They would not have committed the cost because they didn't have the budget. So I'm going to say it again. This financial control is crucial. You can't commit budget you don't have. You only get budget with a signed change order. Always get budget approval before you commit cost. That one discipline alone, that financial control, would save a lot of builders from getting sideways, because in cost plus work, the worst time to negotiate cost is when? After the cost has already been incurred, after the work has been done, because you have no leverage. And third, update before surprises happen. So these are a few things to remember. Number one, define before you start. Number two, when there are changes, get budget approval before you commit cost in the form of a change order. Number three, update before surprises happen. If you want cost plus to actually feel transparent, the client has to know where the budget stands and the schedule stands right now, what could be drifting, any pending or potential changes that are out there, potential impacts to the schedule, what decisions are still open, and what the next commitments are, and what these commitments are going to do to the total cost. You don't notify them of these issues with the invoice. You notify them before the next dollar is spent. That's what real transparency looks like. So let me wrap this up with three things that I want you to remember. First, cost plus does not eliminate risk. It does not remove risk. It just moves the risk. It moves risk from the front end, from estimating and pre-construction, into communication, approvals, documentation, trust, and cash flow. It just moves the risk. Second, the hidden trap is the just enough to start trap. Cost plus contracts are a slippery slope into the just enough to start trap, because it makes it really simple to start projects without clearly defined scopes, without selections made, with allowances, incomplete decisions, and loose approvals that start turning into expensive and uncomfortable conflicts. Third, if you don't create clarity before construction starts, you'll be forced to create it during construction, after the work has been done. And that is always more expensive. It's more stressful. It's harder than it needs to be, and it's harder on trust. Okay, so those are the three things I want to leave you with. And if you're listening to this and you're realizing that your pre-construction process is not where it needs to be, if you were to give yourself a letter grade, A, B, C, or D, you might realize your pre-construction process is a C or a D. It's loose, it's kind of reactive, it's overly dependent on verbal approvals. Maybe your pre-construction process it's non-existent. It's just all in your head. And maybe you'll just tell yourself, well, we'll tighten it up on the next job. You need to fix it now. I hope you've seen the risks of a cost plus contract when you don't have a good pre-construction process, because the real risk is not the cost plus contract. It's not the contract. It's weak pre-construction. Sort of like hundreds of years ago, people who sailed across the ocean would die of scurvy, and they didn't know what was causing it. It was this painful, deadly disease, and they didn't know what caused it. And it was caused by a vitamin C deficiency. Just like that, A lot of the problems with cost plus contracts are caused by a pre-construction deficiency. Contract's fine, the customer's fine, the team's fine. The problem is a pre-construction deficiency, and it causes really painful symptoms. So if that's you, if you want help building out a more robust, well-designed, documented pre-construction process that protects your business, protects your cash flow, protects your margins, and keeps you out of that just enough to start trap, gets you out of constant firefighting mode, then I would encourage you to go schedule a business evaluation call with my team. On that call, we'll help you identify where your process is weak, where risk might be slipping through, and we'll talk about what a proper pre-construction process would look like for you. And we'll talk about, if it makes sense, we'll talk about our Systematize Your Construction Business program, where we can help you, guide you through the process of creating that pre-construction process that we've helped hundreds of people put in place that improves margins, eliminates firefighting, reduces risk, and just makes life a whole lot better. So the link to schedule that business evaluation call is in the show notes, or you can just go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply, APPLY, to book your business evaluation call. These are not for everybody. You need to qualify. You need to be an active construction business owner doing over $1 million a year in revenue. We only work with a handful of people a month. We only onboard a handful of clients a month. We're not right for everybody. We're pretty selective about who we work with. So we'll talk about that on the business evaluation call. So check the link to book that call in the show notes, or go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply to book your call. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.